The bell above my bookstore door usually meant a new customer, but today, its chime felt like a funeral toll. It heralded the ghost of a man I'd buried 5 years ago, now returned to burn down the life I'd built from his ashes. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful little sound that usually made me smile. It was the sound of a new customer, of another dollar earned towards the life I had painstakingly built from ash and rubble. Today, however, that simple chime felt like a funeral toll. My world, so carefully balanced on shelves of curated novels and the rich aroma of dark roast coffee, tilted on its axis. Because standing there, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun, was a ghost. A ghost I had spent 5 years convincing myself was well and truly buried. His name was Liam. He looked different, yet achingly the same. A little older, of course. We were 22 when our world ended. Now we were 27. The lines around his eyes were deeper, and his hair, once a floppy mess he refused to tame, was cut shorter, more professionally. But the way he stood, the slight tilt of his head as he scanned my little bookstore cafe, the easy confidence in his shoulders, that was all Liam. That was the man who had owned my heart so completely that when he shattered it, I wasn't sure any of the pieces were still mine. My hands, which had been wiping down the gleaming espresso machine, froze. The damp cloth fell from my fingers and landed on the floor with a soft, pathetic slap. My breath hitched. Across the room, a college student hunched over a laptop didn't notice. An elderly woman browsing the history section was lost in the past, a different past from the one currently choking me. To them, he was just a customer. To me, he was a walking, breathing cataclysm. He saw me. His eyes, the color of moss after a storm, found mine across the room, and a slow smile spread across his face. It was the same smile that had once made my knees weak, the one I'd believed was reserved only for me. Now, it just made my stomach churn with a toxic cocktail of rage and memory. He started walking towards the counter, his steps measured and sure. He was navigating my sanctuary, my creation, as if he had every right to be there. Every step he took was a footstep on my grave. With each one, a memory I had locked away broke free. Liam proposing on the pier at sunset, the cheap ring feeling heavier and more precious than any diamond. Liam holding me through the night after my grandmother passed away, whispering that we were a team, that we'd face everything together. Liam promising with tears in his own eyes as we signed the lease on our first tiny apartment that he would never, ever hurt me. Lies. All of it. By the time he reached the counter, my heart was a trapped bird beating against my ribs. I forced myself to stand up straight, to place my hands flat on the cool marble, grounding myself in the present. In my present. "Clara," he said, his voice a low rumble that I remembered from a million late-night phone calls. "Wow, you look amazing." I said nothing. I just stared at him, my face a blank mask I had perfected over years of therapy and sheer force of will. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing how his presence unraveled me. He seemed to take my silence as an invitation to continue. He leaned against the counter, casual, as if we were just old friends catching up. "This place is incredible. I saw an article about it online. The Reading Nook. It's really you. Cozy, smart, beautiful." My jaw tightened. He'd been looking me up. The thought was violating. He had no right to know about my life, no right to witness my success. My success was born from the pain he caused. It was the phoenix that rose from the fire he and my sister had lit. Oh yes, my sister, Sophie. The other half of the demolition crew that had leveled my life. The memory, sharp and brutal, sliced through me. Coming home early from work to surprise him, my hands full of takeout from our favorite Thai place. Hearing the sounds from our bedroom, not sounds of distress, but sounds of pleasure. Pushing the door open to see him with her, my little sister. The look on their faces, not guilt, not shame, but shock, like two children caught with their hands in the cookie jar, as if their betrayal was nothing more than a minor infraction, a naughty little secret. "What do you want, Liam?" My voice was colder than I expected, a sliver of ice. He had the grace to look momentarily taken aback. The charming smile faltered. "I was in town," he began, a pathetic see-through excuse. "I wanted to see you, to talk." "We have nothing to talk about," I said, my voice flat. "There is nothing left to be said that wasn't screamed in a 2-bedroom apartment 5 years ago." "That's not true," he insisted, his voice dropping, becoming earnest. It was his manipulation voice, the one he used to get his way, to make you believe that the sky was green if he said it with enough conviction. "Clara, I've done a lot of growing up. What happened? It was the biggest mistake of my life. She was the biggest mistake of my life." He tossed my sister aside with his words, as if she were nothing, and maybe to him, she was. But the fact that he could so casually dismiss the person he blew up our entire world for sent a fresh wave of disgust through me. It meant none of it, not his love for me or his lust for her, had meant a single thing. It was all about him. "I'm not that person anymore," he continued, leaning closer, his eyes pleading. I could smell his cologne, a different scent from the one I used to buy him, but just as cloying. "These last 5 years, they've been hell. Every single day I've thought about you, about what I lost, what we had." He reached a hand across the counter, aiming for mine. I snatched my hand back as if his touch would burn me. His hand hovered in the air for a second before he dropped it. "Okay," he said, nodding. "I get it. I deserve that. But I'm here now to try and fix it. I want to make things right. I want us back." He looked around my shop again, a proprietary gleam in his eye that made my skin crawl. "We can build on this. We can have the life we always talked about." He looked directly at me, his gaze intense, and delivered the line he must have been rehearsing the whole drive over. A line so audacious, so utterly insulting, that it almost knocked the wind out of me. "Let's start fresh," he said. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the quiet rustle of pages turning. My blood roared in my ears. All the pain, the lonely nights, the therapy sessions, the struggle to get the loan for this shop, the sheer back-breaking work of rebuilding a life and a soul from scratch. It all coalesced into a single point of white-hot fury behind my eyes. I opened my mouth, the perfect soul-destroying retort balanced on the tip of my tongue. But before I could speak, he plowed on, a desperate look on his face. "I know it's a lot to ask, but I've changed, I swear it, and I'm not the only one who thinks this is a good idea." He took a deep breath, as if for courage, and then he delivered the final, devastating blow. "I spoke to your mom. She's the one who gave me your address. She thinks we deserve another chance." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. My mom. The blood drained from my face, and for a terrifying second, the edges of my vision went dark. The hum of the refrigerator, the gentle rustle of pages, my own frantic heartbeat, it all faded into a dull, high-pitched ringing. My mother. My own mother had taken the key to my hard-won peace and handed it to the man who had destroyed me. She had painted a target on my back and led him right to my door. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that it eclipsed everything else. For 5 years, my mother had watched me struggle. She had held my hand while I sobbed myself sick. She had listened to me rail against the injustice of it all. She had told me I was strong, that I would get through this, that I deserved better. And all the while, was she just waiting for the day Liam would come crawling back? Did she see my healing not as a victory, but as a temporary state before the man who broke me returned to put me back together? The fury that had been simmering inside me erupted into a volcanic rage. It wasn't hot and messy this time, not the kind that leads to screaming and throwing things. This was a cold, clarifying fire. It burned away the shock and left behind a core of pure, unadulterated steel. My spine straightened. My hands, which had been trembling, became perfectly still on the counter. I looked at Liam, really looked at him, and I no longer saw the ghost of the boy I once loved. I saw a pathetic, entitled man who had mistaken my survival for an invitation. A small, bitter laugh escaped my lips. He looked confused. Good. Let him be confused. "Let's start fresh," I repeated, my voice dangerously soft. He nodded eagerly like a dog expecting a treat. I leaned forward, resting my weight on my elbows, bringing my face closer to his. The smile was gone from my face, replaced by something I'm sure he had never seen there before. "I already did, Liam." His brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" 5 years ago, I said, my voice gaining strength with every word. "You and my sister took a wrecking ball to my life. You didn't just break my heart. You detonated my entire reality. My home, my future, my family, my trust in the world gone. In an instant, I was left with nothing but rubble and the bill for the demolition." I saw a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. He started to speak, probably to offer some half-baked apology, but I cut him off. "No, you don't get to talk. For 5 years, you have existed in silence, and now you will continue to. I'm talking now. After you left, after I kicked you and everything you owned out onto the street, I had to learn how to breathe again. Do you know what that's like? To have to consciously remind yourself to inhale, then exhale because the grief is so heavy it's crushing your lungs?" I didn't wait for an answer. Starting fresh for me wasn't about finding a new boyfriend or pretending it never happened. Starting fresh was finding an apartment I could barely afford and crying on the floor for 3 weeks straight because the silence was so loud. It was working 2 jobs, waitressing until 2 a.m., smelling of grease and regret, just so I could pay for the therapy I needed to stop having panic attacks every time I saw a man who looked even vaguely like you. Starting fresh was cutting my own sister out of my life, a wound that will never fully heal, because every time I looked at her, I saw your face. I gestured around the shop, my sanctuary. This is what starting fresh looks like. Every book on these shelves, I chose. Every bag of coffee beans, I ordered. The loan I took out to build this place has my name on it, and mine alone. I built a life without you, Liam, a life that I love, a life that is peaceful and successful and mine. I did not survive the fire so I could go back and dance in the ashes with the arsonist. I finally pushed myself back from the counter, my point made. The color had drained from his face. "So, no," I said, my voice dropping back to that icy calm. "We will not be starting fresh. I did that already. I did it by living without you." He just stared, completely dumbfounded. It was clear he had walked in here expecting tears, a dramatic reunion, maybe a slap followed by a passionate kiss, like in some terrible movie. He had not expected this cold, articulate woman who had itemized her pain and presented it to him like an invoice. "And you can tell my mother," I added, the venom dripping from my words, "that she is no longer welcome in my life either. She chose her side. I hope she and Sophie are very happy with you." I turned my back on him, a clear dismissal. I started to wipe down the counter again, my hands moving with purpose. This was my space. He was an intruder. He needed to leave. "Get out, Liam." I heard him shift his weight. I expected the sound of his footsteps, the chime of the bell, and then blessed silence. But that's not what happened. The silence stretched, thick with tension. Finally he spoke, and his voice had lost its pleading tone. It was replaced by a quiet, stubborn confidence that sent a chill down my spine. "I don't think you understand, Clara," he said calmly. "This isn't just me wanting a second chance. This is us fixing our family. All of us." I scoffed without turning around. "There is no us. There is no family to fix. Now leave." "I can't," he said. The simple statement was so unnerving. He wasn't leaving. I finally turned back to face him, my eyes narrowed. What could he possibly say now? What threat, what plea was left in his arsenal? He looked at his watch, a handsome, expensive-looking thing that I definitely didn't recognize. "Besides," he said, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips, "it's almost 6. We can't be late." "Late for what?" I snapped, my patience gone. He looked me right in the eye, his expression a mixture of triumph and pity. "For dinner. At your mother's house. She's making your favorite, pot roast. She said to tell you she's expecting all 3 of her children to finally sit down and act like a family again." For a moment, all I could do was stare at him. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it was a masterpiece of manipulation. They hadn't just ambushed me. They had prepared the battlefield, baited the trap with my own childhood memories, and were now summoning me to my own execution, a pot roast, a symbol of home, of comfort, of a mother's love, now twisted into a tool of coercion, the 3 of her children. As if Sophie hadn't ceased to be my sister the moment she climbed into my bed with my fiancé. As if Liam was anything more than a parasite I'd spent 5 years painstakingly starving out of my system. A sound bubbled up from my chest, raw and unexpected. It was a laugh, not a happy one, but a hollow, sharp bark of disbelief that echoed in the quiet shop. Liam's smug expression wavered, replaced by confusion. He had expected tears, anger, maybe a resigned sigh. He had not expected me to find his grand, pathetic gesture hilarious. "Oh, wow," I said, shaking my head and wiping a tear of mirthless laughter from the corner of my eye. "Wow, that is truly spectacular. You and my mother, a regular pair of masterminds." "Clara, this isn't a joke," he said, his tone turning serious, a little condescending. "This is about healing." "Healing?" I pushed off the counter and started walking slowly towards him, my footsteps unnaturally loud on the polished floorboards. "Let me tell you what healing is, Liam. Healing is not pretending a betrayal never happened. It's not sitting down to a meal with the 2 people who ripped your life to shreds and passing the salt. Healing is acknowledging the wound, cleaning it out, and letting it scar over. My scars are a part of me now. They remind me what I survived. You don't get to demand I rip them open again just to make you feel better." I was close enough now that I could see the tiny fleck of gold in his left eye, a detail I once found endearing. Now it just looked like a flaw in the stone. "This isn't about me," he insisted, though his shifting gaze told a different story. "This is about family." "Don't you dare," I hissed, my voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Don't you dare use that word. You are not my family, and Sophie made her choice. She chose you over me. She can live with that. And as for my mother—" My voice broke for a fraction of a second before hardening into something unbreakable. "My mother can have dinner with her 2 favorite children. I'm busy. For the rest of my life." I reached him, and without thinking, grabbed his arm. His muscles tensed in surprise under the expensive fabric of his jacket. My grip was surprisingly strong. I was no longer the soft, pliable girl he had known. I was someone who hauled crates of books and slung heavy bags of coffee beans. I was stronger than he remembered. I started walking him towards the door, a firm, non-negotiable escort. "You need to leave," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "Right now. And you need to understand this, Liam. This is not a negotiation. What we had is dead. It is buried. Do not come back here. Do not call me. Do not try to contact me through anyone ever again. This right here, this is the last time you will ever hear my voice." He stumbled slightly as I propelled him forward. The few customers in the shop were starting to stare, their curiosity piqued by the low, intense drama unfolding at the front of the store. I didn't care. Let them stare. Let them see me exorcising my ghost. When we reached the door, I released his arm and pulled the door open, the little bell chiming mockingly. A cool evening breeze swept in, a welcome rush of clean air into the suddenly suffocating space. "Goodbye, Liam." He stood on the threshold, half in my shop, half out on the street. The confident man who had walked in an hour ago was gone. In his place was someone I almost recognized, the boy who was losing, his face a mask of frustration and disbelief. He couldn't comprehend it. He couldn't process that his charm, his apologies, his entire calculated plan had failed so completely. He looked at me, his eyes searching my face for a crack, a sliver of the old Clara who would have forgiven him anything. He found nothing. He was about to say something. I could see it in his eyes. Another plea, another promise. But then something shifted. The desperation hardened into a cold, ugly glint. The corner of his mouth twitched into a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. He had one card left to play. "You're right," he said, his voice eerily calm. "You have built something incredible here, all on your own. It must have taken a lot of capital. A big business loan, I imagine." I narrowed my eyes. "What's it to you?" He shrugged, a casual gesture that was completely at odds with the sudden tension in the air. He looked back into my store, his gaze sweeping over the shelves, the comfortable chairs, the gleaming espresso machine. He was no longer looking at it with admiration, but with the cold appraisal of an auctioneer. "No reason," he said smoothly, turning to leave. He took 2 steps onto the sidewalk, then paused and looked back over his shoulder at me, his face cast in the long shadows of the setting sun. "It's just, you should really read the fine print on your contracts, Clara, especially when you're starting fresh." He let the words hang in the air for a moment, a veiled threat wrapped in a friendly warning. "You never know who might end up owning your dream." The bell above the door chimed his departure, a final mocking little jingle. I stood frozen in the doorway, his last words echoing in the sudden silence. "You never know who might end up owning your dream." The evening air, which had felt so cleansing just moments before, now felt heavy and cold, thick with a menace I couldn't quite grasp. My heart, which had been pounding with righteous fury, began to thud with a new, colder emotion. Fear. I slammed the door shut, flipping the lock with a decisive click and turning the sign to closed, even though I still had an hour of business left. The elderly woman browsing the history section gave me a startled look. "Sorry," I mumbled, not meeting her eyes. "Family emergency." I needed them gone. I needed to be alone. I needed to think. After the last customer had shuffled out, I leaned my back against the locked door, the cool wood a flimsy barrier against the chaos Liam had just unleashed. The words circled in my mind like vultures. Read the fine print. Who might end up owning your dream? It didn't make sense. The loan for the shop was ironclad. I had spent weeks with a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Albright, going over every single line. It was a standard small business loan from a reputable national bank. My name was the only one on it. My assets were the only collateral. There was no fine print he could be referring to. It was just a parting shot, a pathetic attempt to get under my skin. It had to be. But even as I tried to reassure myself, a sliver of ice slid down my spine. Liam wasn't stupid. He was manipulative and selfish, but he was also smart. He wouldn't make an empty threat. He'd thrown that line out with such deliberate, chilling confidence. It was a move he had planned. He knew something I didn't. My hands trembled as I walked back to my small office behind the counter. The space was cluttered with invoices, order forms, and half-read books, a testament to my busy, happy life. But now it felt like the walls were closing in. I sank into my worn office chair and stared at the framed photo on my desk. It was me on the day of the grand opening, a little over 2 years ago. I was cutting a ribbon, my face split in a grin of pure, unadulterated joy. I looked exhausted but triumphant. I looked free. Had it all been a lie? I tried to think. What contracts? The bank loan, the lease on the building, vendor agreements for coffee and pastries. None of it made any sense. Liam had no connection to any of it. He had been a ghost for 5 years. "Your mother," a voice whispered in the back of my mind. The thought was so vile I flinched. No, even she wouldn't do that. Sabotage her own daughter's hard-earned success? Hand a weapon to the man who hurt me so deeply? Betray me on that fundamental A level? She had ambushed me with a dinner invitation. Yes, she had given him my address. That was bad enough. But this felt like a different category of betrayal altogether. It felt monstrous. But what did she know about my business? I had been careful to keep my finances private, especially from her. After the breakup, her advice always seemed to lean towards me being too ambitious, towards finding a safe job, towards not overextending myself. Looking back, I realized it was her way of trying to keep me small, to keep me dependent. She'd never been truly supportive of the bookstore. She called it my little hobby. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my breath held tight in my chest. I logged into my online banking portal, my eyes scanning the details of my business loan. Everything looked exactly as it should. The principal, the interest rate, the payment schedule, all normal, no red flags. I clicked through document after document, my panic mounting with each fruitless search. Nothing. He was bluffing. He had to be. I leaned back, my head hitting the back of the chair with a thud. I was letting him get to me. This was his game, psychological warfare. He couldn't win me back with charm, so now he was trying to break me with fear. And my mother was his willing accomplice. The rage returned, hot and clean. I grabbed my phone, my thumb hovering over her contact photo. A smiling, deceptively warm picture of the two of us from years ago. I was going to call her. I was going to scream. I was going to demand to know how she could do this. But then my phone buzzed in my hand with an incoming email notification. The subject line was bland, unassuming. A message from Albright and Associates. My blood ran cold. It was from Ms. Albright's law firm. I never heard from them unless it was a holiday e-card. I opened the email, my heart hammering against my ribs. Dear Miss Jensen, this email serves as a formal notification regarding a recent inquiry and subsequent action taken concerning the silent partner clause in your initial seed funding contract. As per the terms stipulated in the Angel Investor Agreement, Section 7B, the investor has exercised their option to convert their initial loan into a majority equity stake in the Reading Nook, LLC. I stopped reading. My world tilted and went silent. Silent partner clause? Angel investor agreement? There was no angel investor. The seed money, the $20,000 I'd needed in the very beginning to secure the bank loan, before I had any assets of my own. It hadn't come from an investor. It had come from my grandmother's inheritance. My mother had controlled the trust. She'd told me it was an advance, a gift from Grandma to help me get on my feet. We'd signed some papers at her lawyer's office. Just a formality, she'd said. I was so desperate and grateful at the time, I'd barely glanced at them. I had trusted her. My shaking hands scrolled down, my eyes frantically searching for the rest of the email. I found it, a single line that made the floor drop out from beneath me, a line that confirmed my absolute worst fear and revealed the true, horrifying depth of the conspiracy against me. Ownership has been formally transferred, effective immediately, to the primary stakeholder, Mr. Liam Morrison. The email swam before my eyes, the black letters blurring into meaningless shapes. Ownership has been formally transferred to Mr. Liam Morrison. The words didn't just sink in, they detonated. The air was sucked from my lungs, leaving a vacuum of pure, suffocating shock. This wasn't just a betrayal, this was a coup. A meticulously planned 5-year-long con orchestrated by my own mother and the man who had destroyed me. The seed money, my grandmother's legacy, hadn't been a gift. It had been a Trojan horse, delivered with a loving smile and a comforting hug, filled with soldiers waiting for the perfect moment to storm the gates and burn my city to the ground. For a long moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My beautiful little shop, my sanctuary, my triumph. It was a cage, and they had just locked the door. Every book I'd shelved, every customer I'd served, every dollar I'd earned had been for him. I had been working for my own enemy. The realization was so grotesque it threatened to shatter my sanity. But then, the white-hot rage from earlier returned, and this time it was a righteous, cleansing inferno. It burned away the shock, the fear, the despair. They thought they had me. They thought I would crumble, that I would walk into that pot roast ambush defeated and ready to negotiate the terms of my surrender. They had forgotten who I was. I was the woman who had clawed her way out of the wreckage they'd made of my life. I had built an entire world from ash. They thought they could take it. They were about to find out how fiercely I could fight for it. My first call wasn't to my mother or to Liam. It was to Ms. Albright. My voice was shaking but steady. "I need to see you. Now. It's an emergency." An hour later, I was sitting in her stark, modern office, the damning email glowing on my tablet screen between us. She read it, her expression growing grimmer with each line. She pulled up the original contract, the one I had foolishly signed in a haze of grief and gratitude 5 years ago. And there it was, buried in dense legalese, Section 7B, a clause so predatory, so devious, that it could only have been drafted with malicious intent. It stated that the angel investor could at any point after 5 years convert their loan into a 51% controlling stake in the business for the symbolic sum of $1. My mother had presented it as a simple loan document. She had lied to my face. "This is unconscionable, Ms. Albright said, her voice tight with anger. "But it is, I'm afraid, legally binding. You signed it." "So that's it?" I asked, a tremor in my voice. "He just wins? He takes everything?" "Not necessarily," she said, leaning forward. "A contract signed under fraudulent pretenses can be challenged. Your mother misrepresented the nature of the document. We can argue she exploited your emotional state. It will be an ugly, expensive, drawn-out fight in court, but it's a fight." And that was all I needed to hear. Then we fight. The next evening, I didn't go to my mother's house. Instead, I let my lawyer do the talking. Liam and my mother and my sister were sitting down to their celebratory pot roast when my mother's phone rang. It was Ms. Albright, formally notifying her that I was suing her for fraud and conspiracy. I can only imagine the dinner conversation soured after that. The weeks that followed were hell. Liam, now the majority owner, tried to make my life impossible. He showed up at the shop attempting to play the role of the new boss. He tried to change suppliers, alter the decor, fire my best employee. I stood my ground. I had a lawyer's letter stating that until the lawsuit was settled, any changes to the business operations were frozen. He could own the shares, but he couldn't touch the soul of the place. He was forced to stand by and watch as I continued to run my shop. Customers, loyal and wonderful, noticed the tension. I was honest with them. I told them there was an ownership dispute with a toxic ex. They rallied around me, buying more books and coffee than ever before, their support a shield against Liam's smirking presence. The real battle, however, was with my family. My mother left tearful, manipulative voicemails. Sophie sent rambling texts, a bizarre mix of apology and accusation, claiming I was tearing the family apart. They didn't understand. They were the ones who had torn it apart. I was just refusing to help them stitch the corpse back together. The legal battle was as ugly as Ms. Albright predicted. They fought dirty. They tried to paint me as unstable, incompetent. But we had a secret weapon, my grandmother's journals. Grandma had been a meticulous record keeper. In her elegant script, she had detailed her desire for her inheritance to be used to give me a fresh start, a gift with no strings attached. She wrote about her distrust of Liam and her worries about my mother's tendency to control her children. It was a voice from the grave, testifying on my behalf. The final hearing was 6 months later. I sat in the courtroom and listened as their lawyer tried to spin their actions as a misguided attempt to reunite a broken family. I watched Liam on the stand, his charm curdling into petulance under Ms. Albright's sharp questioning. I watched my mother crumble when presented with her own mother's words, her lies unraveling for all to see. In the end, the judge saw it for what it was. He called their scheme a deplorable manipulation of familial trust and voided the contract. He didn't just give me back my 51%, he awarded me punitive damages for the emotional distress and the attempted fraudulent takeover. The reading nook was mine. All of it, unequivocally. I walked out of the courtroom and didn't look back. I didn't see Liam's face, pale with shock and fury. I didn't see my mother sobbing into Sophie's arms. Their story was over. Mine was just beginning again. That evening, I went back to my shop. I flipped the sign to open and brewed myself a cup of the darkest, richest coffee we had. The bell above the door chimed. A young couple walked in, smiling, their hands full of books. The simple, cheerful sound filled the quiet space. It wasn't a funeral toll or a warning bell. It was the sound of my life. A life I had fought for, a life I had saved, a life I was living, finally and completely, without them. And it was beautiful.